This is another one in our series where I'm talking about the individual blends and bottlings that we do at Germain-Robin. And today I want to talk about the apple brandy. We started distilling apples in about 1991, basically just to sort of fool around. You know, we have a still and there were apples around, and so we started buying them and making brandy out of them. We never took it much seriously, you know, commercially. We were selling maybe 30, 40 cases a year of it, mostly to people that came to the tasting room. And but then around 2005, I was over in Anderson Valley talking to a guy who was Anderson Valley has a lot of apple growers. They used to be practically pure, nothing but apples. It was an orchard economy up until the arrival of grapes. And this guy was saying that the growers had these beautiful apples, which they weren't, because they're, you know, these old varietals tend not to be commercially appealing. They look kind of funky, you know. They were just being selling to be turned into apple juice. And there were years in which people were leaving their apples on the trees because they couldn't afford the money that they would pay to have them picked was less than they would get for them when they sold them. So I said, well, how much money are you talking about? And they said, you know, we're getting, you know, $200, $225 a ton. And I went home and did some math, and then we had a meeting with a group of these people, 6 or 7 of them. And I proposed to them that we pay them $500 a ton, which we could afford to pay and make money on, we thought, and allowed them to, you know, do some particular things to us. In other words, pick to our specifications rather than for maximum ripeness or so forth. That's what the extra, you know, they needed about $400 a ton. If we paid another $100 a ton, we felt like it was fair to ask them to do things for us that they wouldn't ordinarily do. You know, be very careful to pick only sound ripe fruit and so forth. And, you know, you saw a bunch of very happy apple growers. So we basically kept a lot of these guys going. And we're talking about apples that are basically not grown commercially, Ribston Pippin or Arkansas Black or Grime, or and then of course we use some of the famous apple from Anderson Valley, the Gravenstein. And you know, and then we had to wait about 5 or 6 years before these heirloom apples that we were picking were making up more than 50% of the blend, because we didn't feel it was fair to be misleading the consumer. But right now, it's way over 50% of the blend. This is our most recent bottling, last year's heirloom apple brandy. And we had the same experience with the apples that we had with grapes. In other words, apple brandy is made, let's say, the most famous one is Calvados, which is made in Normandy. And the reason that the distilling industry caught on in Normandy was that it's right on the coast, has a very cold climate. Apples don't get ripe enough to eat. So they were making cider out of them, and then somebody started distilling the cider. And these were not eating apples. So we're using things that are beautiful eating apples. And they just have more flavor. They just, you know, and because of our climate, they get a little bit riper. But the Anderson Valley is very cool at night, so they maintain this very high level of acidity. This is very parallel to why our grapes are so good. So it makes this beautifully. This brandy sort of both smells and tastes a lot like biting into a fresh apple, but with all the depth and richness that comes from being purified and concentrated in a still, then put away in really good oak barrels for a while. We use a little more American oak with the apple than we do with our brandies. It seems to balance out a little bit better in the glass, but it's still way more than half of it is aged in Limousin oak barrels. And you know, we now are just beginning to sell this in commercial quantities.